So, welcome everybody. Today the theme is the transcendent wisdom of Buddhist teachings of the Dalai Lama. And I will soon talk about that. But in His Holiness's tradition, in all of Tibetan Buddhism, we always start things out by generating our motivation. And so that's what we'll do first. Okay, so sit up straight, your hands on your lap, right on the left, thumbs touching. Keep your eyes a little bit open if you can. That lets some light in, and that way you won't get drowsy. And so let's take a couple of minutes and simply observe our breath without changing our breathing pattern at all. And as you're observing your breath, be aware of how your breath connects you with all the living beings on this planet, and how it connects you with the environment. Breathing in oxygen, exhaling carbon dioxide, all the plants and trees doing the opposite. And so we are interdependent and benefit each other. Let's do that for a couple of minutes. Let the mind settle. So we'll cultivate our motivation right now. And we want our motivation to be one that is very profoundly felt, and one that has to do with compassion and care for all living beings, that leads us to want to progress along the path ourselves, overcome our own afflictions and limitations, develop our good qualities, so we can be of the greatest benefit to others. So to develop that motivation, we begin by considering the kindness we've received from other living beings. So start first with your family and friends. Think about how your parents underwent so many difficulties in having children, supporting them, educating them, teaching us manners, and the kindness we've received from our friends who have supported us and understood us. So spend a minute or two really being aware of the influence, the positive influence from your family and friends the kindness you receive from them. And then consider strangers, all the people who grow your food, who transport it, who package it, who cook it, the people who make the roads that we drive on, who are often repairing those roads in the middle of the night, the people who create our electricity, our internet, our plumbing, and so many things that we just take for granted in our lives are solely dependent on the efforts and kindness of other living beings. And I think more than any time in human history, we are now dependent on the efforts of others just to stay alive. So enlarge this perspective of your mind that sees kindness, and think of the kindness of all the different strangers that you relate to in the course of your life, and how much you receive benefit from them. And then consider even the kindness of people who have harmed you. This may initially sound strange, but if you think about it, when we experience difficulties, we always come out stronger. We realize resources within ourselves that we can depend upon. We increase our internal resources and skill and wisdom. And so even though the people who harm us may not intend to benefit us, actually they create the circumstances which prod us to grow. And so we grow in ways that we never would have otherwise. So try to see the kindness of people you don't get along with or people who have harmed you in that light. And from this reflection of the kindness we've received from others comes a very strong wish to repay that kindness. And the best way to do that is not simply by taking care of others' needs of this life, giving them food, clothing, and so forth, although that's really wonderful to do and we should do that. But an even better way of repaying kindness is to be able to share the Dharma with others and lead them on the path to liberation, so that they can be free of all afflictions, all the confusion and dissatisfaction and suffering of repeated rebirth in cyclic existence. And to do that, we have to actualize the path ourselves, develop the wisdom, compassion, skillful means, power, and so forth, all the excellent qualities of a fully awakened one. And so we generate that motivation to do that, even though it will take many lifetimes, many eons maybe, a lot of hard work. But it's the most expansive, noble motivation that we can have for doing anything. So we strengthen our joyous effort and we make a determination to complete the path to Buddhahood, so we can more effectively be of great benefit to living beings. So generate that motivation right now. And let's make that our motivation for sharing the Dharma for the rest of this session. Okay. So I was asked to speak about the Lamrim. The Lamrim is a Tibetan term, and it translates to be either the gradual path to awakening or the stages of the path to awakening. But the idea is that the Buddha's teachings are very, very expansive, and we need to approach them in an organized manner, a step-by-step manner. Yeah. And His Holiness often comments that our minds are very complicated things. And so one meditation, one style of teaching, one topic to contemplate is not sufficient to change all the different aspects of our mind that need to be either purified or, in the case of good qualities, enhanced so they can become the qualities of a Buddha. So that's why the Lamrim encompasses so many different topics and different kinds of meditation. Mm-hmm. So we often want to come in and just give me something simple to do. Okay, just one meditation, one thing, and I'll just do that. And that's good to start with if you want to. But it's really good to remember that if we want to become fully awakened, then there's many qualities to develop and many aspects of our mind to work with. Yeah. And one meditation technique, one topic won't do them all. Now, so the Lamrim sets out all these different topics and meditations in an abbreviated form. The initial Lamrim was written for people who had completed their philosophical studies in the monasteries. So it was actually written for people who were already Buddhist, who already had a Buddhist worldview, and who, having completed their studies, were now going to meditate, and they needed a more concise, systematic, view on which to meditate. So along come us who are not Tibetan Buddhists, and some of us who weren't even Buddhists to start with. And we're taught the Lamrim, and there's some parts of it that really make us scratch our head. We don't understand them so well. When the teachings talk about different realms of existence, when they talk about past and future lives, these kinds of things, we're not so sure about. And then we have a lot of other questions, the kinds of questions that Buddhists may not ask, but non-Buddhists would ask. Especially what is culture and what is Buddhism? Yeah, because we came to practice Buddhism, we didn't come to adopt another culture. Okay, so those kind of topics are not really explained in the Lamrim because that genre of text was not written for us. It was written for a different audience. But the main topics taught in the Lamrim apply to us. So, having studied, the traditional Lamrim in the traditional way, I thought, it would be so nice to have a short text that some of the people who taught in the West could use that was designed for a Western audience. Or it could be a Chinese, Vietnamese, Japanese, whatever audience, but people who weren't Tibetan Buddhists, who weren't familiar with the usual Tibetan Buddhist approach. So I requested an audience with His Holiness, and it took a couple of years to get the audience. And then I went in and I requested him, please, to write a short text like this that could be used as, the basic outline. And he said, oh, very good, but let's first write the explanation of it. And he gave me a transcript of some of his teachings and sent me packing to start writing. And so I used that, and then because I've heard a lot of His Holiness's teachings, I brought in, things that I've heard in his other teachings. And so the manuscript got bigger and bigger, and I collected questions from a lot of non-Tibetan Buddhists, the questions they had about Tibetan Buddhism, about Buddhism in general. I was able to get some interviews with His Holiness and pose those questions to him, and he replied. And that was really wonderful to see how he, addressed so many of our questions. And the manuscript got bigger and bigger. And then at one set of interviews, His Holiness said, this shouldn't be just the regular Lamrim. We should have the perspective of other Buddhist traditions in this book. Yeah. And so he sent me to to learn Theravada Buddhism. Yeah, so I studied with Bhikkhu Bodhi for a while. I went to Thailand and stayed in a monastery. And he also wanted the view of the Chinese Buddhists. So I had already, I have many friends in that tradition. I had been to Taiwan for my full ordination, but I continued to learn more about that tradition. And the manuscript kept getting bigger. And years went by because my initial request to him was made around 95, 96, sometime like that. And then finally, I had a clearer idea of exactly what he wanted. And so started writing. Okay. So the first book that came out was Buddhism, One Teacher and Many Traditions. And so this book talks about the various Buddhist traditions and how they interrelate. It's really talking about the belief system, the doctrine. It's not talking superficial about, they all bow, but they bow in different ways. Okay, it's really talking about what the beliefs are and how people meditate and practice. And it was wonderful to really, for me personally, I gained so much learning about the different traditions. And I really came to see how the Buddha taught things in stages and how the various traditions we have are interrelated, how they build on each other, how topics are explained differently in different traditions, but so much of the main point is the same. And so that really helped me to understand the Buddha as a very, very skillful teacher, because he realized that there wasn't one way that fits everybody. And that even goes for whether somebody's a Buddhist or they're a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a Zoroastrian or a Hindu or whatever. Okay? That is, Holiness's philosophy is very much people have different inclinations, different dispositions. And so the Buddha taught in many different ways, and other spiritual leaders taught in different ways. But it's up to each of us to find a system that corresponds to where our heart is and what helps us to be a more ethical human being, somebody who has love and compassion for others, somebody who forgives. Yeah. And so really emphasizing character development. Yeah. And so I began to see how, in terms of Buddhism, the Buddha did that by teaching so many different methods that evolved into different Buddhist traditions. But all are based on the Four Noble Truths, and they're all based on having love and compassion for other living beings. Okay, so writing this book took care of a little bit of the manuscript that I had written over 20 years, but there were still many pages of the manuscript that had not been published yet. So then we started doing the Library of Wisdom and Compassion. And right now, there are 5 volumes of it are published. There's going to be at least another 5, maybe 6, I'm not sure. But this will be His Holiness's Lamrim for not only Westerners, but Chinese, Vietnamese, people from other Asian traditions, who are unfamiliar with Tibetan Buddhism. And he even said he wanted it to be for young Tibetans, because young Tibetans are now getting a modern education. And my experience in giving talks to them is that they ask questions that are very similar to the questions that Westerners ask. Yeah. So my hope is that this series of books, written in English, will be used in Dharma centers internationally to act as a bridge between the very general teachings on the Lamrim and the thought training practice, and the more difficult to understand translations of the ancient sages, because there's a big gap between those two. So often I feel what I'm doing in the books is translating from English into English. Okay? In other words, from the philosophical English of the translations of the great philosophical texts, which are really profound, and the general texts that are written, acting as a bridge. So here, when we started with approaching the Buddhist path, which was the first in the series, His Holiness, often when he gives talks in the West, he would start with talking about the mind and how the mind worked. And he would talk about the two truths, which is actually a very complicated topic that usually comes well at the end of the Lamrim. And he would talk about the four truths, or the four noble truths, and especially true cessation and true path, which again are not easy topics. And he would walk into an audience of people in the West. Some were Buddhists, many weren't. And he would give these profound topics and weave his talks between the profundity of emptiness and nirvana, and then go into, how we need to be able to forgive people who have harmed us. And then he would go back into another profound topic and then come out and talk about compassion, which everybody can understand. So this was his way of doing it. And he didn't always answer all the questions and explain everything in a topic at one go. Okay? So the first volume, Approaching the Buddhist Path, was based like that. And it starts out talking about the mind. Okay. And it starts talking about, if you talk about the mind, then you have to talk about rebirth. Okay. Because, there's a continuity of mind. Everything doesn't just shut down and go out of existence at the time we die. But many people, were not brought up with the idea of rebirth. Maybe the idea of heaven or hell, but that's not a Buddhist idea. Yeah, because that vision is based on a creator God, that creates people, that sends people to heaven and hell. Buddhism is based just on the idea of cause and effect and dependent arising. And so it's our mind that is actually the creator of our reality, and the continuity of the mind that continues, and the influence, or how our actions or karma influences our experience. So really going into all of that at the beginning, and it's quite interesting. And I think what it does is it lays a good foundation for understanding where Buddhism is coming from. Okay? And it's challenging for us because often it's ideas we've never heard of before. So it makes us think. And this is another thing that His Holiness wanted. He's very much based on everybody should use reason and logic to determine what they believe in. We should not just have blind belief. Okay? And he speaks about that as really one of the strengths of the Nalanda tradition, the tradition coming from the ancient Indian University of Nalanda, and that it uses reasoning and logic and really encourages us to think about things, and analyze and determine for ourselves what we believe. So this really requires energy on our part, and it requires that we study and learn the teachings, and then that we think about them and we discuss them with other people. And this is why the Tibetan tradition of debate evolved, is that was the way they discussed. Now, we may not want to do debate like they do, jumping up and down, screaming at each other, clapping in each other's faces. But it's very helpful to discuss the teachings and really think deeply about them. Okay? And so not just think, oh, my teacher said that, so therefore I believe it. Okay? His Holiness does not advocate that approach at all. So the first volume goes into some of those topics. It also talks about the thought training practice. Yeah. And so one of the things we're really trying to understand as we develop a grounding foundation for our study and practice of Buddhism is how our mind creates our reality. And especially how we interpret a situation creates how we experience it, and how different innate and acquired conceptions that we have color what we think is an objective reality. Okay? So it's a way of leading into talking about selflessness and emptiness that starts with just looking at how we interpret other people's words and actions, and how we have a veil in front of us. And the root of that veil is that everything is an external reality. There's me in here, a real solid me. And then there's the rest of the world out there, objective. And what I perceive is actually what exists and how it exists. So when we have a conflict with other people, we are certain that we are right because I am seeing an objective situation. When, of course, the other person that we're in conflict with thinks the same thing, but they're wrong, you see, and they don't know what they're talking about. They're projecting, but we have the one right objective understanding of the situation. Right? So there's a little bit of arrogance in there, and condescension for these other people who think they're right and they don't really realize that we're the one who's right. So we have to start looking at that, and we come to see so many different ways that we filter things and project things and exaggerate things, to create something that we believe is real but isn't. Okay? And we build identities. I am a this, you are a that. Therefore, you should relate to me this way, and I can relate to you that way. And we don't even realize that we have these conceptions, but we live them out in our lives, and we create so much confusion in our own lives and the lives of other living beings. So whereas we all want happiness and not suffering, because of our distorted conceptions, we have so many disturbing emotions, and then we act out of these disturbing emotions and create actions, karma. The karma, our actions lead, we could say, like memory traces in our mind, or energy traces. That's not a very good explanation, but it leaves some kind of imprint or seed on our mind. And then when conditions come together, that seed or imprint ripens in terms of our experience. So we always say when bad things happen, what did I do to deserve this? When good things happen, we never say, what did I do to deserve it? We say, I want more and I deserve more. Why? Because I'm me. Okay, can you see how we get into conflict with other people? Okay, so we need to develop this Buddhist worldview of the mind, how the mind functions. Okay, what it is. Is it something permanent or impermanent? Yeah, is there a truly existent self or me that's at the center of it all? Yeah, this reality that I perceive outside, is it changing all the time, or is it fixed and predictable? Yeah. The things that I see as beautiful and pure, are they really? The things that I see as the source of pleasure, are they really objectively pleasurable? Yeah. So we have to look at how these conceptions work that we aren't even conscious of, and then challenge them and penetrate these wrong conceptions and dispel them. And in that way, we really open our mind. We become so much more tolerant, flexible. We aren't so ego-sensitive, because we realize there's no big I at the center of this whole thing. Okay? And we also look at the situation we're in, being born again and again and again in cyclic existence under the influence of ignorance, all these wrong conceptions, the disturbing emotions, the non-virtuous or unwholesome actions we do. Yeah. And how we were born again and again, and experience so many unsatisfactory situations. But we also learn that there's a way out of the situation. Yeah. And that's what the Buddha teaches us too. Here are things to think about. If they make sense to you, practice them. Use them to challenge some of the very crusty beliefs that you have in your mind that you are sure are totally right. Yeah. Be brave and courageous enough to really challenge your interpretations. Yeah. Your exaggerations, your beliefs. And through that, we can begin to overcome the ignorance, these wrong conceptions, the disturbing emotions and other mental afflictions, and arrive at a state of peace, at nirvana. And then the Buddha says, nirvana, that's great. But remember everybody else. And so the Buddha also emphasized starting with the four immeasurables to develop love, compassion, empathic joy, and equanimity, starting with those to really purify and refine our relationship with other sentient beings. Because wherever we go in this world, even you're in the cave somewhere in the mountains, you still exist in relationship to every single sentient being in this universe. Yeah, we always exist in relationship to every single sentient being in the universe. Because in one life or another, we've been each other's parents and lovers and enemies and teachers. And even in this life, what we do counts. What we do influences other people's experience. So if we have a sense of integrity that wants to live an ethical life based on our own self-respect, then we want to keep good ethical discipline and clean up our act so that we stop harming others. And we also come to realize that when we harm others, we also harm ourselves, because we're creating that negative karma that leaves seeds on our own mind stream that will ripen in terms of our own suffering. If we're kind towards others, we leave virtuous or wholesome, we do virtuous or wholesome actions that leave their seeds on our mind that will ripen in terms of our own happiness. So our happiness and the happiness of others are very interrelated. Yeah, we can cause others happiness and pain, and in doing so, we cause ourselves happiness and pain over a period of different lives. But also in this life, it's very evident that if we harm others, then we're going to live with a lot of unhappy people. Unhappy people don't just sit there and smile. Yeah, they let you know that they're unhappy. So if we exploit others, if we oppress others, if we don't treat others fairly, then we're going to live with a lot of unhappy people, and that will make us unhappy. So His Holiness always says, if you want to be selfish, be wisely selfish. In other words, if you want to really work for your own happiness, do it in a wise way. What is that wise way? He says, take care of others. If you take care of others, if you cherish other living beings, you create less negative karma, more positive karma. You influence others in a very beneficial way here and now. You can have a good rebirth. You accumulate the merit so that you can delve deeper and deeper and gain the profound realizations of the Dharma. So he says, even our full enlightenment, our Buddhahood, depends on the kindness of every living being. Because if we don't have great love and great compassion for every living being, then we can't generate the bodhicitta, the aspiration for full awakening, in order to benefit every living being. And if we don't have that motivation, we're never going to achieve full awakening. So he says, when you look at every single living being, you've got to think, that living being, depending on that living being, I will attain Buddhahood. I can't leave any living being out of my love and compassion. Now, for us ordinary beings, this is a bit challenging, isn't it? because we have very strict categories in our mind of friends, friends who we're attached to, and we always want the best for them. Neutral people, strangers, we don't care much about them, just apathetic. And enemies, and here by enemies, I mean somebody we don't get along with, somebody whose actions we feel threatened by, somebody who we think has harmed us, okay? And for those people, boy, we have anger, resentment, loathing, the whole 9 yards, okay? So then we hear, oh, it sounds very good. Yes, cherish all living beings. And this was, what I was taught as a kid, love thy neighbor as thyself. It sounds great, but nobody told me how to. And some people were such idiots and jerks. How could I ever love them? And then I encountered the Buddha's teachings, and the Buddha said, first of all, this is why you should love them. And this is how to think step by step by step to transform your mind so that you can actually feel love and compassion and forgiveness towards them. So it's not a thing of suppressing these emotions and saying, I shouldn't feel that. After all, I want to be a good Buddhist. So I just talk about love and peace and light, and it all makes everything okay. No, that's repressing things. That's just being a fake, okay? What we really need to do is do some deep internal work in here about how we judge and classify people and how our whole view of life is based on me. And I just happen, coincidentally, to be the center of the universe. And as the center of the universe, there are rules to my universe, and other people should follow the rules of my universe. They should never break these rules. First rule, everything should go the way I want it to go. Right? Second rule, everybody should like me. Third rule, I never make mistakes. And even if I do, you're not supposed to notice them. And even if you do notice them, you don't talk about them. And even if you do talk about them, you make them into compliments and praise for me. Okay. Fourth rule, everybody should like me. Everybody should only praise me, never criticize me. Oh, and another very important rule. Everything I think is right. And you should remember that. Every idea I have is 100% correct. Even if I change my mind the next day. On the day I had a certain idea, it was correct. When I change my mind the next day, that one now becomes correct. So you should know this, because I would never, ever, ever have a wrong idea. I only have right ideas. And remember that. And don't you dare interrupt me when I'm talking about my right ideas and contradict me. That is verboten. Forget that. Okay. And when I share my feelings, you should always respect them. When I tell you how much I suffer because other people don't respect me and they make fun of me and they don't accept me and I don't belong and they criticize me. When I tell you how much I suffer, you should always side with me because I am always right when there's conflicts. And my emotions are always justified. Yeah. And everybody should respect me. Yeah. Yes, I believe it's a free world. So you are all free to respect me, and you should respect me. It's not allowed not to respect me. I don't have to respect you because you're, but everybody has to respect me. Right? Right? Oh, I'm glad you agree that I'm the center of the universe. Yeah, now that's the problem. Not everybody agrees. But of course, that's because they're wrong and I'm right. And so then I had to go through life trying to convince other people of how right I am. And they don't believe it. Can you imagine that? They don't believe it. And they give me advice, which is ridiculous. I don't listen to it. But when I give them my sageous, wonderful advice, they have the nerve to tell me to mind my own business. Oh, unbelievable, these sentient beings. I mean, I see them so clearly. They only need to do this, and then everything would be wonderful. And they just don't do it. Hopeless. Okay, so there's something about that self-centered attitude that is just not working. Because we've had that attitude since beginningless time in all of our lifetimes, and here we are, still doing the same old thing. And it hasn't gotten us anywhere. Okay? So the Buddha says, let's check that out. You know, are you really the center of the universe? What are the defects of being so self-centered? What are the benefits of cherishing others? Yeah. And we have to think about that. And we have to go inside and see a lot of that really junky stuff inside. And forgive ourselves and forgive others. So that's quite important. One thing that helps us to see how contorted our mind is philosophy. So Buddhist philosophy is not dry stuff. Sometimes it may look like that when we study the ancient texts, because the old texts in traditional style, Indian style, they valued poetry. So they wrote the verses, in very beautiful language. But the verses are, you can't, there are many different ways to interpret a verse. Yeah, many different ways. So different sages wrote commentaries on these root texts and the verses and explaining, what they really mean. Because you can't put a very profound philosophy with all of its manifestations and implications in 4 lines, and even in a text full of verses of 4 lines. So we need the commentaries. And we study all of this, not for intellectual knowledge, but because it points out in us the flaws of our way of thinking. It points out this self-grasping ignorance, what it adheres to, how it's unrealistic. It points out how we think everything in our world is objectively out there just as we perceive it. So the philosophical texts aren't just for learning and debating. They're for really using them to look at how our own mind works. So there's a three-step process in this. We first learn the teachings, and it's chiefly by hearing. Okay, we hear the teachings. We then nowadays, I really recommend, if you can, go to actual live teachings where there's a live teacher who's teaching. If you can't do that, use the internet, like right now. But if it's really important, I think, to establish a relationship with a live teacher. So if you can do that, do that. And it may take you time to find a teacher that you really click with, and that's okay. Yeah. And check that teacher out before you make that relationship. Make sure they have good ethical conduct, that they know the Dharma well, that they have compassion, and that they themselves are teaching with a good motivation to help others, not just to gain offerings and a following. Actually, in fact, this is getting a little off the topic, but in the second volume, which is called The Foundation of Buddhist Practice, His Holiness goes into great depth about how to relate with a spiritual teacher. And it's very important that we understand this, and that we know what are the qualities of a good teacher. We know what are the qualities of a good disciple. Yeah, we know how to act if there's problems that occur. Okay, so I really recommend this. Foundation of Buddhist Practice. Yeah, chapters, 6, 7, something in the middle of the volume. Okay? So we learn from our teachers and from studying the text. Then we think about what we've learned. Yeah? So that we make sure we understand it correctly. Yeah, just because we've heard teachings doesn't mean we necessarily understand them correctly. Yeah, we have to really think about them, use logic and reasoning to understand them and to apply those teachings to our mind to understand how our own mind works. Third step is now we meditate. Okay? And the meditation is to really integrate the teachings in our mind stream. So for a complete practice, we need all three: learning, thinking or reflecting, and meditating. Yeah. That doesn't mean that we only learn at the beginning, and then we stop learning and only reflect in the middle, and then we stop reflecting and only meditate at the end. It doesn't mean that. It means, whatever we learn, we try and reflect on and meditate on that. Yeah. And in the process of doing that, especially if we're able to establish a daily practice, then we can really step by step, gradually, go through the stages of the path and really experience the result of doing that in terms of transforming ourselves. So the Buddha Dharma isn't just for calming our minds. Yeah, it's not just to be mindful and calm our minds. It is to dispel our wrong conceptions and find the correct views, and then to reform our emotions so that we aren't just acting with our instinctive attachment or anger or jealousy or pride, But we can clear that stuff away and really have an open heart towards other living beings. Okay?